Why does it seem like everyone is starting to switch over to Linux? And the short answer to that is Windows.
So you're sick of Windows, you've reached the end of your tether, as it were, you're pissed off with Microsoft, you don't want to use Mac, you want to try and make the transition over to Linux. You've seen people having a good time.
Over 500,000 users fled Windows 11 in the past year alone. Germany moved 30,000 government workers off Windows and onto Linux.
Actually might be the year of the Linux desktop. Microsoft is plugging more holes that let you use Windows 11 without an online account.
Ahead of schedule and under budget. Zorin OS hit 1 million downloads in a single month, with 78% of those downloads coming directly from Windows users making their exit. Steam's Linux player base keeps climbing, and the growth curve is not flattening, it is steepening. Bill Gates spent 4 decades making Windows the default answer to the question of what operating system a computer should run. 5 Linux distributions are in the process of changing that answer, and they are doing it faster than anyone, including the people building them, predicted. Before we get to the 5 distributions dismantling Windows 11's dominance, we have to understand exactly how Microsoft handed Linux this opening. Because this did not happen, because Linux suddenly became amazing overnight. Linux has been technically superior for demanding computing environments for decades. Every one of the world's 500 fastest supercomputers runs Linux. The server infrastructure powering Amazon, Google, and Microsoft's own Azure cloud platform runs Linux. Android, the operating system in the majority of smartphones globally, is built on the Linux kernel. The argument that Linux was not ready for regular users was never really a technical assessment. It was a narrative, a story the industry told itself because the switching cost was high enough and Windows was familiar enough that most people never seriously considered the alternative. What changed is not Linux's capability. What changed is that Microsoft made Windows 11 aggressive enough, invasive enough, and hostile enough to its own users that millions of people hit their personal breaking point simultaneously. And Linux was sitting right there, more mature, more polished, and more accessible than it had ever been, ready to catch them. The breaking point arrived with a date, October 2025. Windows 10 officially reached end of life. Microsoft communicated this transition with the warmth of a debt collection notice. No more security patches. No more bug fixes. No more updates of any kind for the operating system that hundreds of millions of people were still using on hardware that ran it perfectly well. The options Microsoft offered were precisely 2. Upgrade to Windows 11 on Microsoft's terms, or pay for extended security updates, a subscription that itself expired in October 2026, leaving every holdout on an unprotected, permanently abandoned platform. Stay on Windows 10 after that, and ransomware groups, which specifically target end-of-life operating systems because they know nobody is fixing the vulnerabilities, would have an open, publicly announced window to exploit every machine still running it. Microsoft announced the deadline publicly. Ransomware operators read the same announcements everyone else does. The pressure on users to move was not subtle. It was existential. And when millions of users started reading the fine print on Windows 11 to understand what they were being pressured into accepting, what they found made the Linux forums louder than they had ever been in the history of the platform. Windows 11 requires TPM 2.0, a small hardware chip that the majority of machines built before 2018 simply do not contain. Computers running Intel i7 processors with 32 gigabytes of RAM. Machines that handle video editing, software development, gaming, and complex professional workloads without breaking a sweat. Machines that are not slow, not broken, not failing in any meaningful sense. All of them officially declared incompatible with Windows 11. Not because they lacked the processing power, not because they could not handle the software, because they lacked a specific chip that Microsoft decided was mandatory for reasons that had far more to do with pushing a hardware refresh cycle than with any genuine security benefit. 400 million devices crossed into forced obsolescence overnight by corporate decree. Users who had tolerated Microsoft's increasingly aggressive behavior for years, the telemetry, the forced account creation, the OneDrive redirection, the Edge promotion, the start menu advertisements in an operating system they paid for, suddenly faced a concrete, unavoidable choice. Spend hundreds of dollars on new hardware that met Microsoft's arbitrary requirements, or find another way. Linux handed them that other way. And critically, Linux handed them a better way. Not just a cheaper way, a faster, cleaner, more private, more stable way. A way that worked on the hardware Microsoft had just told them was obsolete. That combination, zero cost, works on existing hardware, no surveillance, no forced updates, proved irresistible to a user base that had been pushed far past its patience. Privacy was already a festering wound in the relationship between Windows users and Microsoft, long before the hardware ultimatum landed. Windows 11 forces a Microsoft account to complete basic setup of your own computer. It installs OneDrive. It embeds Edge into every corner of the interface. It connects your local machine behavior to Microsoft's cloud profile of your computing habits. And then came Recall, the feature that transformed user frustration into something closer to genuine alarm. Recall takes periodic screenshots of everything happening on your screen and stores them in a database so an AI system can analyze your activity and make it searchable. Your emails, your banking sessions, your private messages, your medical searches, your confidential documents, everything you have ever done on your machine, captured and indexed. Security researchers demonstrated within days of the announcement that the Recall database could be accessed and exploited by malicious software. Passwords visible on screen were being stored in searchable form. Credit card numbers, sensitive financial data, all of it sitting in an indexed repository that any malware reaching your machine could now mine for a comprehensive visual history of your entire computing life. Microsoft paused the rollout, redesigned it, made it opt-in, added encryption, quietly started pushing it out again after the noise subsided. The reputational damage was irreversible, regardless. People now understood something they could not unknow. Windows 11 was not software they owned. It was a platform they were being monitored through, and that understanding, once it settled in, sent a significant number of users directly to the Linux download pages. They were not going back. Now let us talk about the 5 distributions that are actively replacing Windows 11 across millions of machines right now. Because the reason this migration is accelerating rather than plateauing is that each of these distributions is exceptionally well targeted at a specific type of Windows refugee. Together, they cover almost the entire spectrum of users that Microsoft is currently losing. Pop! OS is where gamers and creative professionals landed when they stopped accepting Windows as the only serious option for high-performance computing. Developed by System 76, Pop! OS was engineered from the ground up to run lean. Background processes are minimal. There is no telemetry quietly consuming CPU cycles while you are trying to render footage or push frame rates in a demanding title. No cloud sync running invisibly in the background, stealing resources from your active workload. The performance numbers are striking and consistent. Pop! OS delivers up to 30% faster frame rates than Windows 11 on identical hardware. The same GPU, the same processor, the same RAM. The difference is that on Pop! OS, those resources are working exclusively for your tasks rather than for a corporation harvesting your behavioral data in the background. Proton compatibility means your Steam library transfers almost completely. Gamers who made the switch report older hardware performing as though it was newly purchased, because nothing invisible is stealing from it anymore. For the gaming community that has been among the most vocal in documenting Windows 11's performance regressions, Pop! OS represents a concrete, measurable improvement on hardware they already own. Zorin OS is the most psychologically intelligent Linux distribution ever built. Two brothers designed it around a single insight that has proven to be worth more than any technical specification. People leaving Windows do not want to learn a new operating system. They want to escape a bad one. Zorin offers interface layouts that replicate Windows 7, Windows 10, and Windows 11 so accurately that non-technical users can sit down and navigate it without any hesitation. The familiar taskbar, the familiar file manager, the familiar application menu, all of it present and functioning the way users expect, with zero telemetry underneath and zero Microsoft account required to access their own desktop. When Windows 10 reached end of life, Zorin hit 1 million downloads in a single month. 78% of those downloads came from Windows users making their exit. That is not Linux enthusiasts downloading a new distribution to experiment with. That is nearly 1 million ordinary Windows users who decided in a single month that they were done, and chose Zorin specifically because it made the transition feel like as little of a transition as possible. Zero telemetry, zero forced cloud integration, no corporation deciding when your machine gets updated. You control your system. That concept alone, which should be the baseline expectation for any operating system, has become Zorin's most powerful selling point, because Microsoft made user control feel like a luxury item rather than a default condition. Fedora is where professional developers and engineers landed when they stopped tolerating Windows as a development environment. Microsoft's Windows subsystem for Linux was always a compromise, a compatibility layer pretending to be a native solution, adding overhead and complexity to work that should be straightforward. Fedora is native Linux, and the performance difference for serious development work is significant and immediately apparent. Fedora ships with security-enhanced Linux built in, giving technical users granular control over what every process on the system can access. For researchers, engineers, and security professionals handling sensitive work, this level of control is not a preference. It is a professional requirement. Red Hat backs Fedora's development, the same company whose enterprise Linux powers critical infrastructure globally across healthcare, finance, and government systems. This is not experimental software. This is professional-grade tooling with institutional backing, and it outperforms Windows 11 for development work in ways that are not marginal or theoretical. They are immediate and measurable from the first day of use. Ubuntu is the entry point that made Linux genuinely accessible to the mainstream and remains the most widely deployed Linux distribution on Earth. The ecosystem of community support surrounding Ubuntu is so large that virtually every question a new user encounters has already been asked, answered, and documented somewhere online. Hardware support going back 15 years makes Ubuntu the direct technical rebuttal to Microsoft's TPM 2.0 exclusions. Machines that Windows 11 officially refuses to run on are running Ubuntu smoothly right now, performing tasks their owners need without Microsoft's permission and without Microsoft's surveillance. For schools operating on tight budgets, small businesses watching every dollar, and users in developing economies where hardware replacement every 2 to 3 years is simply not financially realistic, Ubuntu is not just an alternative. It is the obvious correct choice. No licensing fees, no activation codes, no subscription reminders. The operating system is yours, completely, from the moment you install it. Benchmarks consistently show Ubuntu outperforming Windows 11 on identical hardware because the operating system is not constantly running processes that serve corporate interests instead of the person at the keyboard. Linux Mint is the operating system for people who want the switch to feel like nothing happened. Built on Ubuntu's long-term support foundation, Mint prioritizes stability and familiarity above everything else. The Cinnamon desktop environment is engineered to feel like Windows 7 and Windows 10, to a degree that is genuinely remarkable. Non-technical users have switched to Mint, used it for days, and only discovered they were running Linux when someone else pointed it out. That level of seamless transition is not accidental. It represents years of deliberate design work focused entirely on the experience of ordinary users, who simply want their computer to work without surprising them. Mint runs on hardware with 4 GB of RAM and dual-core processors, hardware that Windows 11 treats as beneath consideration. 5 years of security updates on the long-term support base delivers a stability record that Windows 11's update history genuinely cannot compete with. The October update that cut NVIDIA gaming performance in half. The January patch that broke functionality across multiple system configurations. The routine updates that introduced black screens, disappeared start menus, and randomly crashing task managers. Linux Mint's update track record looks nothing like that. Because Mint is built by a community whose only interest is making the software better for the people using it, not accelerating a hardware refresh cycle or expanding a cloud services revenue stream. The argument that kept users on Windows despite everything, the one Microsoft could always point to when people threatened to leave, was the application ecosystem. Your software runs on Windows. Your games run on Windows. Your productivity tools need Windows. That argument has been systematically dismantled over the past several years and is now barely standing. Google Docs, Microsoft's own Office 365, Slack, Zoom, Notion, Figma, every tool that modern work actually runs on now operates inside a web browser. The operating system underneath stopped mattering for the majority of daily computing tasks the moment that browser first shift completed. And over 85% of Steam's entire game library now runs on Linux through Valve's Proton compatibility layer, with Steam's own data showing Linux representing a growing share of its active player base. Valve built Proton because they saw this migration coming and positioned themselves ahead of it. Smart companies do that. Microsoft chose to ignore it. Governments did not ignore it either. Germany's Schleswig-Holstein completed its migration of 30,000 government employees to Linux ahead of schedule and under budget. France's National Police Force has operated on Linux for over a decade. The Italian Ministry of Defense runs Linux across thousands of machines, handling sensitive national security operations. These are not organizations making ideological statements about open-source software. These are institutions choosing Linux because it gives them something Windows architecturally cannot provide: complete control over their own systems, with no foreign corporation holding administrative keys to their data or deciding unilaterally when their machines get updated. Here is the reality that the technology industry has largely avoided saying plainly for years. Linux has been the technically superior choice for demanding computing environments for decades. The world's fastest supercomputers chose it. The cloud infrastructure that runs the modern internet chose it. The smartphones in the majority of pockets worldwide chose it. The argument that it was not ready for regular users was a narrative built on switching costs and familiarity, not on honest technical comparison. What has changed is not Linux's capability. What has changed is that 5 specific distributions matured to the point where the transition cost for ordinary users dropped to nearly zero, and Microsoft simultaneously made Windows 11 hostile enough to push millions of users past the threshold where that switching cost was worth paying. The collision of those two forces is producing the largest migration away from Windows in the history of personal computing. And the users leaving are not coming back. They installed something free on hardware Microsoft told them was obsolete, discovered it ran faster and cleaner than Windows ever did, and realized they had been tolerating an increasingly bad deal for years out of pure habit. That habit is broken now. For over 500,000 users and counting, it is broken permanently. Bill Gates built a monopoly on the idea that Windows was simply what computers ran. 5 Linux distributions are proving, one converted user at a time, that it never had to be.